All right, all right, all right. Bringing you good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in this summit. I bring you greetings from Beneath the Grief Ministries Counseling Services, and my name is Dr. Jones. And I am coming to you today in this summit to talk about the subject of grief. And I just want to give you a little bit of my journey as I prepare to go into the topic that we're going to talk about on today. First of all, my practice is a faith-based practice. I am a therapist, a grief therapist, as well as a life coach, getting ready to become a mental health coach. I am a professional counselor, and also I am an author. I'm also a blogger, and I also love to ride roller coasters. So I want you to know that in this journey of grief, there is some things that I would like to say. So first of all, let me just tell you a little bit of my journey in grief. First of all, I came into grief work after being a minister, after being a funeral director, after being a counselor and a grieving family member. Also, at the same time, I was also a student. So I was conducting a funeral for my eldest sister who passed away of AIDS. And while going through the different roles that I had taken, it seemed that, of course, I didn't know what I was doing, but I was doing grief work. So maybe about the year of 2001, a dear friend of mine, she made it known to me. She says, Dr. Jones, that you seem to have an interest in this grief work. I did not think about such, but she seen that. And at that point in time, I was listening. And while listening to her, at that moment when I left her presence, I had put together going to, in the state of Maryland at that time, I put together an application and I sent it off to the Commerce in Maryland. And guess what? She also at that time had given a name. And when she gave the name, she was just saying things like beneath the sympathy, and she said beneath the grief. And when she said beneath the grief, something happened to me. Something happened to me within me that I knew that something was going on. So what it was that was a practice that was being started. And that's what happened. That's what happened when all the information sent to the Commerce of Maryland, or it all began to happen. Beneath the Grief Ministries came into fruition. And when it came into fruition, it came with a motto. And the motto of it was John 10:10. The thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I'm come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. And knowing that with grief, you see, with people and such, it's a big deal. It's a big deal because with grief, people handle grief differently. One of my books that I wrote, Handle Your Grief, There is Hope. Nothing is impossible. There are things about grief, and when I speak about it, I sound very passionate about it, and I might sound preachy, and that's okay. But when I talk about grief, I talk about it in a sense of how serious it is. Because in my work of being since 2001, what I've found is that in this grief journey that I recall that there was a word that I found that people used, which was the name of bereavement. And surely people know what that was. They knew what it was. But you know what? That's what it was. And that's what they would say. But I would always watch people when they said that word. I would always want to know when they're saying bereavement, just exactly to get into it, to let me see if they knew what it meant. I'm going to tell you something. I got responses from people, and guess what? They were at funerals. But can I tell you something? They had no clue what it was. And I was surprised about that. Somebody saying, what? What do you mean? Bereavement's been around forever. That's just the thing. It's been around forever, but guess what? There was something else going on. Let's tell the truth about the matter. It was grief. It was grief going on, and you find that people will not say the word of grief. Oh, let me tell you, that word has really just come out within the last 5 years because so many other words were put in front of it when it really was grief, and that's what needed to be talked about. So it is what it is. Grief is grief. And we need to talk about it. We need to do something about it. Let me tell you something right now, that grief counselors and coaches get bad names. You know why? Because people don't want to go to them. Because when they hear the word of grief, they, oh, no, 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 no. I don't want to hear about that. Because one, you know what they're thinking? They're sick thinking 6 feet under. That's all they're thinking. So nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to do that work. But let me say something about grief. You see, when I look at grief, I don't just look at grief as 6 feet under. Grief is many things. Grief is, hey, guess what? Grief is a pain that you have in your toe. Grief is you bump your head. Grief is many things. Grief is the loss of your job. Grief is divorce. Grief is not just death, and that's what people don't want to touch. Those very, very same things can make you feel that you're dying. Oh, yeah. Pain can make you feel like that. It can make you feel like you're dying. So you know what? It's grief. You know why it's grief? Because it's bothering you. It's grief because you're grieving over it. You're grieving over that pain. And if you don't have anybody to talk to about it, and you don't want to talk about it because you'll say, oh, well, I'll just leave it alone. Oh, yeah, but guess what happens in grief sometimes? What happens with it is we ignore it. And when we ignore it, what happens? The pain can get bigger. The pain can get severe. And you see what that is? That's nothing but grief. That's all it is. And we need to really concentrate on what grief is. Okay. So in this part for me, this summit here, this piece, this summit here that we're talking about grief, and that's what it is. So got my little notes here to say in reference to this grief. My topic on today in reference to grief is because it's such a passionate to me that the topic of it is entitled Grief and Communication. And why do I talk about grief and communication? Because it's an area that I find that people won't talk about it. I'll find that, oh, well, because you think about it in a sense of somebody dies. Yes, yes, yes. Somebody dies. But let me tell you something. People don't want to talk about that because there's something going on inside of them. And so we're trying to, like I said, grief counselors get bad raps. They get bad raps because they're grief counselors and grief. Oh, I don't want to talk about that. That's just too bad. They don't want to do it. But let me say something in reference to that grief, that if you don't handle it, it's gonna handle you. No, it's gonna handle you because I've seen it. I've seen people have grief within, and you know what they do? They tend to bottle it up. They tend to keep it within. They don't want to say nothing about it. So something happens. People respond when they're in grief, but they may not respond the way we want them to respond in terms of communication. And they won't do anything, sometimes for weeks and months and sometimes years. And this is what grief can do. So with grief and communication, that's a very, very, very significant role. So another book that I wrote, which was called Grief to Growth, one of the co-authors that co-authored it with me, we took some words and I use certain ones of those words often. So I want to talk to you in reference to just a few of these words because it pertains to communication. And when we are dealing with grief, one of the words is pain. Oh, yes, with pain. Oh, tell me how many times we go through pain. We go through it all the time, not just in death. We go through pain in situations. But you know what happens a lot of times in grief? People won't talk about the pain because they're like, oh, well, I don't want to say that to somebody else because, oh, I'm going to be called crazy, or I don't want to tell them that I'm hurting, but it's all pain. And guess what it is? It's grief. It's grief to them because it's bothering them. Another word that I'd like to look at in the book that I have is denial. How many times do we look at people in grief in denial? How many times that we look at them and they will not be realistic? They won't be realistic. They'll be all over the planet, but they'll be in denial about the very, very thing that needs to come to reality. People do it often. They just don't want to see it. But guess what it is? It's grief. It's grief that they are experiencing and they just don't want to do the work. They don't want people to see what's behind. You see what I mean? It's not just death in the grave. Grief is other things. So with denial, you see what denial can do? Denial can make you in a sense of you don't even know reality. You won't look at it. You just turn around from it. You see what denial can do? Denial can hurt you. Denial will make you grieve. Denial is denial. And when somebody's in denial, that's a hard nut to crack. It's a hard nut to crack when somebody don't want to see the truth, when they don't want to see reality. See, this is communication. This is communication, that pain. If you don't communicate it, that's a problem. If you're in denial, that's a problem. And guess what? It's grief. It's grief because it's bothering you. Another word, procrastination. People do it all the time. People procrastinate a lot. They will not do it. They will delay it. Oh yeah. They'll delay the process often, and they just won't do that thing. And why? Why won't they go ahead and grieve that? Well, because they just don't want to. They just want to refuse it, and they have their reasons. But you know what? I'm just going to say with that, procrastination is horrible. It's horrible, and guess what? It is grief. That's all it is. It's grief. It's grief to them. It's grief to other people that's looking at them, and people won't deal with it. Let me say that with grief and procrastination, it hurts. It hurts. It's gonna hurt in the end. It's gonna hurt when a person don't go ahead and do the work and procrastinate it. Procrastination holds up the process. Procrastination holds up futures. Procrastination holds up careers. Procrastination holds up situations. Procrastination hurts, and it hurts individuals. It hurts all over. So, what is it? What is procrastination? It's grief. It's nothing but grief. That's what it is. Another word, fear. Well, I'll tell you what, we can take the word of fear and communication. Oh, you don't hear that much. You'll see it, but the real fear, that it's grief. That's what it is. And you think that with fear, it is so out there. Think of the pandemic that we're in right now, and what grief has done in a pandemic. Guess what it's done? It's made pain. Guess what it's done? People in denial. Guess what it's done? People procrastinate, and people are fearful. And guess what it is? It's all grief. You cannot put this in one bracket. You can't do it. It won't happen because it's all in your face. It's everywhere. And guess what? If you don't deal with it, guess what? It's going to hurt, and it's going to come back. It's not going nowhere. It's going to stay right in your face. But you see, that's why there's work that we have to do. That's why as people that are dealing, managing, helping, the professionals, the coaches, the therapists, those that are helping people in grief, we got to help them see the grief. We got to help them get through these areas, and we have to help them communicate it, because if they don't communicate it, guess what? You're really not helping them. Hello and hello. If they have to be able to communicate it, well, of course, somebody said, well, my clients communicated it, but are they really communicated it? Again, people will deny, and people will procrastinate because they are vulnerable. They're vulnerable, and they may not want you to know it all, but you helping them to get it all. You're pushing, I say push the button in terms of talking about grief, because that's how serious it is. And we need to bring it out. Oh, we know, we see it now. Come on, that all things are being censored. We can't say it, but guess what that is? It's nothing but grief. So grief is everywhere. You can't avoid it. You can't get away from it. It's in your face. So what do we do? What do we do? What are we supposed to do, people? What are we supposed to do? Are you scared to say that word of grief? I hope not, because if you're helping somebody in grief, call it what it is. Grief is grief. It's there. Oh, how long does it take? How long does it take? Well, guess what? It may not take till tomorrow. It might take 2 or 3 years to talk about it. And guess what? It's okay. I encourage people to talk about, if you want to talk about somebody that passed away. I'll encourage somebody to talk about a family member that they so loved and they so remember. I'll encourage them. It's okay to talk about. Nobody's, but you have people that don't want to talk about that. Oh, because you know why? Come on. Because they're fearful. Well, they're fearful because I don't want to think about that because I might die. It's inevitable, okay? So let's just be truthful about it. But let's help those that are grieving. Let's help those in any kind of grief. I'm not just talking about one grief. I'm talking about many griefs. I'm saying let us help the people because that's what we need to do. That's what we're called to do. We are called to help the people that are grieving. I ask you on today that you think about and that you go into your caseload and that you really take a look at this grief issue because I'm going to tell you a lot. There's more you can do. There's more that you can do. And if we do that and help our clients to grieve and grieve it and communicate it strongly and encourage them to communicate it. Encourage them to say words that they will not say. Encourage them to get those feelings because you'll be surprised how people won't talk about the feelings that are nothing but grief. That's all it is. So people won't talk about those feelings. We need to help them to do that. We need to help them to talk about those feelings in any way that they can. But you know what? If they don't think that you're really paying attention to them, they'll walk away. They say, "Oh, I just got them. That's about it." But you need to help them to communicate it. It makes me think about a lady that I follow on Twitter that helped me with this topic of communication, because in this communication, there is so much grief in it because there's so much grief, period, in what's going on. So I'm talking to you today. I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you out there. You got a problem because I tell you, people won't handle it. You got a problem. Go see the professional. Stop being cheap. Stop being cheap. Go ahead on and pay the money and get your help that you need because you're in grief. You're in grief, and let the person help you. Don't think that you can do it all by yourself. That's why God put people here to help you. So let the people help you. Let the people help you to handle that grief. Stop avoiding it. People do it. That's another word. They avoid it. People avoid it. They're just like, "Oh, no, I ain't going to do that." But guess what it is? It's nothing but grief. That's all it is. We got a job to do. We need to do better. We need to do better in this area of grief. And we need to help people understand it. That's another thing. Understand it. Help the people understand what grief really is and what will happen if they don't do their work. Show them, let them see it, that if they don't do it, that there are other things that's going to follow that they're not going to be happy about. But you have people that only think about that grief as only 6 feet under. That's all they're thinking about. 6 feet under grief. I'm sorry, but it's just not so. Grief is many things. I have another friend, she does a podcast called Good Grief. yeah, Good Grief. And Good Grief because she's helping them learn how to handle grief. So Good Grief. So we need to help the people get to those places. I am so tired of seeing people and they're grieving. But you know what? When they hear that word grief, you see them run like never before. But I'm gonna say that with that grief, with it, there's some things that we need to do. So I'm just gonna say, have a listening ear. And there's somebody saying, "Well, I got one." Good. Have some more of a listening ear. Have a listening ear signal out for the grief that that person has. Really take a tune in, because they may say it's not grief, and that's what it is. Because they may be denying, they may be procrastinating, and they may be in pain. So have that listening ear. So important to have that listening ear. And in your practices, let the people see how to handle grief. Sometimes, we could say a little bit about it, about how we handled some grief that we had. It's okay. Some people need to kind of hear that as an encouragement. I didn't say go tell them everything, but they need to kind of hear a little bit of what you did in reference to handling the grief, and it's okay. But again, we need to call it what it is, and it is grief. I say, as one of a little twist that I put in my practices, let's face it, everyone grieves something. Yeah, we do. Everyone grieves something in their life, one way or another. But you know what? We just have to make sure that we don't deny it. We have to make sure that we don't avoid it. We have to make sure that we don't procrastinate it. We have to make sure that with pain, hey, guess what, lady? I'm in pain, okay? And it is what it is, because it's grief to them. So, with this grieving issue, I'm going to close out here with my response that when you are grieving, as I say, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, are free at last if you handle your grief. If you do the work that you're supposed to do in your grief. That's this summit is about grief. And so everything is about grief. So in that grief, call it what it is. Don't avoid it anymore. Don't let nobody else avoid it either. It is what it is, and tell them what it is. A lot of times I have to let people know that they're giving me a situation, and I know it. I know it from the jump street. I said, it's nothing but grief. And I say to them, I said, do you know that your situation is grief? The responses I get, it's like I can eye opener, like I said something with four heads. And I'm saying, yeah, you know why it's grief? Because it's bothering you. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's like I said something that they're shocked about. I made a revelation or something. It's not a revelation. It is what it is. So we need to tell them. We need to let them know what it is. So I say to you all that is helping those that are grieving, make sure that your ears are open, your eyes are open, that people hear what you're saying in reference to this grief, because that is what it is. There is no small grief. There is no middle-sized grief. There is no bigger grief. Grief is grief, and that's exactly what it is. So call it what it is, work with it, work hard with it, and I tell you, it's a rewarding work if you do it. Don't be scared of it. People might say, oh, it's something else, but call it out. Don't let it be just put in the background. Do the work. Do the work, do the work, do the work. And I say to you, handle your grief. Tell the people, handle your grief. There is hope. Nothing is impossible. And with that, also, too, if they do their grief work, guess what? Grief to growth. They will grow in their grief. That's what we want. We want people to grow while they're grieving. It's a process. It's a process they're going through, and they can get through it if we help them get through it. And that's why you're all here, to do that, to help them get through it. So help them to handle the grief and to grow with the grief so that they can get stronger. You have a peaceful day to you. Thank you. Bye bye.